Level 1. The first cut. The scalpel is already in your hand when you realize you have no idea what you're doing. 3 hours ago, you were a second-year medical school dropout, $40,000 in debt, 6 months behind on rent, and one failed licensing exam away from the end of a career that hadn't technically started yet. You knew anatomy, you knew procedure, you just couldn't pass the board exam that would make any of it legal. The man who found you wasn't subtle. He sat across from you at the coffee shop near your apartment, the one where you spent most afternoons pretending to study, and slid a phone across the table. On the screen was a photograph of your student loan balance, then a photograph of your apartment building, then a number, $8,000. Cash. Tonight. You said no. You meant it when you said it. Then he told you what the job was. A simple procedure. A man with a knife wound who couldn't go to a hospital because the knife wound came with questions nobody wanted to answer. Clean the entry, close the bleeders, suture the skin. Things you'd practiced on cadavers 14 times in your first year. Things you could do. You told yourself you were just helping someone who had no other options. That framing will carry you for a while, long enough to get through the first night. The patient is a man in his 40s. The wound is a 4-centimeter laceration just below the left rib cage, lateral to the linea alba. Not deep, no organ involvement. You can tell from the bleeding pattern. Steady but not arterial. No signs of peritoneal contamination. You clean it with betadine from the kit the man gave you. You use 3-0 Vicryl for the interior layer and 4-0 nylon for the skin. 14 interrupted sutures. 38 minutes start to finish. When you're done, your hands are steady. That surprises you. The man hands you an envelope. You don't count it until you're back in your apartment. $8,000. All hundreds. You put it in your kitchen drawer under the takeout menus. You tell yourself it was a one-time thing. What you don't know, the man who hired you took a photograph of your face when you walked in. It's already been shared with 4 other people. Your name, your address, your dropout records, all of it verified before he ever sat down across from you at the coffee shop. They spent 2 weeks vetting you before making contact. You passed every check they ran. You were selected, not found. Level 2, the pattern. The second call comes 11 days later, 1:47 in the morning. You answer it. This time the patient has a gunshot wound, 9mm entry through the right thigh, 3 centimeters lateral to the femur, no bone involvement. You control the bleeding, irrigate the wound canal with 500 milliliters of saline, pack it with gauze, and close the skin in 2 layers. You give him a course of amoxicillin clavulanate to cover gram-positive flora and send him out the door with written instructions you print from a medical website because you don't have prescription pads. He pays you $12,000. You buy a proper surgical kit, retractors, proper suture materials, a pulse oximeter, a blood pressure cuff. You tell yourself this makes it safer, that you're being responsible. The equipment costs $2,200 and you pay for it in cash at a medical supply wholesaler who doesn't ask questions about licenses because his customer base has learned not to need them. By week 6, you have treated 11 patients. Stab wounds, gunshot wounds, 2 broken orbital bones from a beating, 1 septic hand wound that someone had tried to treat with vodka and electrical tape. You're getting faster. Your suture lines are cleaner. You've started doing pre-procedure assessments, quick abdominal palpation, breath sounds, capillary refill, the things that tell you whether you're dealing with a straightforward wound or something that will kill the patient before you can close it. You're good at this. That is the most dangerous thing that has happened to you so far. What you don't know, a detective in the organized crime unit has started a new file. 3 patients treated with gunshot wounds at the same address in the same 6-week window. All 3 gave the same story to their parole officers. Fell, hit something, nothing serious, but the wound descriptions don't match the stories. The detective has no name yet. He has a location. He has a pattern. In law enforcement, a pattern is the beginning of everything. Level 3, the upgrade. They move you to a proper space at the end of month 3. Not a hospital, not a clinic, a basement unit beneath a dry cleaning business in a neighborhood where nobody looks twice at anything. But it has overhead surgical lighting, a proper operating table with drainage channels, an anesthesia cart stocked with propofol and fentanyl and midazolam, and a woman named Daria who introduces herself as your scrub nurse without explaining where she came from or how long she's been doing this. You don't ask. That's a skill you've been developing. The volume increases immediately, 3 to 4 patients a week. The cases are harder now. A man with a perforated bowel from a stab wound. You spend 4 hours irrigating the abdominal cavity and resecting 12 centimeters of damaged sigmoid colon and astomosing the ends with interrupted 3O PDS, praying the connection holds. It does. A woman with a traumatic pneumothorax, you insert a 28 French chest tube between the 4th and 5th rib in the mid-axillary line and watch her oxygen saturation climb from 84 to 97% in 4 minutes. A teenager with a shattered radius from a gunshot, you set it as best you can without fluoroscopy, knowing the alignment isn't perfect, knowing he will have limited supination for the rest of his life. You are doing things that require a surgical residency to do safely. You have never done a residency. You tell yourself that something imperfect is better than nothing. This is true. It's also how people justify things indefinitely. Your fee is no longer negotiated per case. You're on a retainer now, $40,000 a month, deposited in cryptocurrency to a wallet they set up for you. The volatility makes you nervous. You ask about cash. They say the volume has become impractical. You accept this. What you don't know, the detective has a name now, yours. Your medical school records, your dropout date, your licensing exam failure. He has connected the organized crime unit file to 3 separate hospital admission reports. Patients who arrived at emergency rooms weeks after their initial injuries with complications that suggested prior amateur intervention, improperly closed wounds, inadequate debridement, post-surgical infections consistent with non-sterile environments. The file now has a title. It has been elevated to a task force.
Level 4. What you tell yourself.
You are 8 months in when you save a life that couldn't have been saved anywhere else. The patient arrives at 3:15 in the morning with a single gunshot wound to the chest. Tension pneumothorax, his trachea is deviated to the right, his neck veins distended, his blood pressure 70/40 and falling. You have maybe 4 minutes. You grab a 14-gauge angiocath and push it into the second intercostal space in the mid-clavicular line. The rush of air is immediate. His blood pressure starts climbing within 60 seconds. You follow with a proper chest tube and he stabilizes. He is alive because you were there, and because you knew exactly what to do, and because no emergency room in the city could have reached him in time. You think about that for a long time. This is how the psychology shifts, not through money, not through habit, through the moments that feel unambiguously good, the lives that exist because of you. You start keeping a mental count, 14, then 22, then 31. The number of people walking around this city because your hands were steady at 3 in the morning in a basement under a dry cleaning business. You stop thinking of yourself as someone who made a bad decision. You start thinking of yourself as someone who found a calling. Daria notices the shift. She doesn't comment on it directly. She just starts calling you doctor. You don't correct her.
What you don't know is the task force has executed 4 search warrants in the past 6 weeks. None at your location. They don't have it yet, but at addresses connected to 3 of your patients. 2 of those patients have agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for reduced charges. They don't know your name, but they know the neighborhood. They know the dry cleaning business. One of them remembers the smell of the chemicals through the ventilation. The task force now has a search radius of 4 city blocks. Level 5. The complication. The patient dies on a Tuesday. The first one you've lost. Abdominal aortic injury from a close-range shotgun blast. The damage is catastrophic. A 2-centimeter tear in the infrarenal aorta, active hemorrhage at a rate you calculate at roughly 200 milliliters per minute. You need a vascular clamp, a synthetic graft, a perfusionist, 2 more surgeons, and a fully equipped trauma bay. You have none of those things. You pack the wound and apply direct pressure and watch his systolic pressure drop from 80 to 60 to 40 to nothing over the course of 19 minutes. There was nothing you could have done. That's true. It doesn't help. They remove the body. You don't ask how. You clean the table. You restock the cart. You sit in the corner of the room for 45 minutes and don't move. Then the next patient arrives. You stand up. You scrub your hands. You begin. That is the moment you understand what you've become. Not the first night with the scalpel and the envelope. Not the retainer or the cryptocurrency or the basement under the dry cleaning business. This moment, when a man died on your table and you stood up 45 minutes later and kept going, because stopping was no longer an option you had access to. You start having trouble sleeping, not from guilt exactly, from the specific alertness of someone whose nervous system has forgotten how to be off duty. You wake at 3 in the morning even when there's no call. You lie there running procedures in your head, checking your mental inventory of the supply cart, calculating dosages. You've lost 12 pounds. Daria brings you food sometimes. You eat it without tasting it. What you don't know, the task force executed a search warrant on the dry cleaning business 2 days ago, at 6 in the morning before it opened. They found a ventilation connection to the basement unit that wasn't on any building plan. They didn't enter the basement, the warrant didn't cover it, and the connection was ambiguous enough that the supervising judge required a second warrant. That warrant was filed this morning. It will be approved within 72 hours. Level 6. The raid. You are mid-procedure when the door comes off its hinges. The patient is under propofol and fentanyl, 140 milligrams and 150 micrograms, properly dosed, properly monitored. You are 40 minutes into a laparoscopic exploration of a suspected internal bleed when the tactical team enters. 8 officers in full gear. They move through the space with the specific efficiency of people who have practiced this exact entry in a training facility. You don't run. You don't move. You keep your hands visible and you say the same thing 3 times in a row. The patient is under general anesthesia. He needs to be monitored. Someone needs to watch the pulse oximeter. One of the officers, a woman, tactical vest, no expression, steps forward and checks the monitor. She calls for an ambulance. She does it without being asked. You notice that. They cuff you. They walk you out of the basement and up through the dry cleaning business and into the street. It's 11:20 in the morning. The street is busy. People look. You are wearing surgical scrubs and there is blood on your gloves, and you are being walked to a federal vehicle in front of 30 witnesses. Daria is already in a second vehicle. She doesn't look at you. You don't look at her. The charges come 4 hours later in an interview room. Operating without a medical license, a Class D felony under state statute, maximum 4 years per count. Conspiracy to obstruct justice. Conspiracy to aid and abet criminal activity. The federal prosecutor sits across the table and lists 23 separate procedures documented from evidence recovered at the scene. 23 counts, each one a separate charge. The sentencing exposure is 94 years. He slides a plea agreement across the table. Cooperate fully, provide complete documentation of all patients and operators. Accept a 9-year sentence with eligibility for parole at 6. You have 48 hours to decide. What you don't know, they already have almost everything. Daria has been cooperating for 3 months. The cryptocurrency wallet was traced 6 weeks ago. The only thing they actually need from you is confirmation of the identities of the people at the top of the organization. The plea agreement isn't about the information, it's about whether you understand your situation clearly enough to make rational decisions. Level 7. The processing. You take the deal. The debrief lasts 11 days, 14 hours a day in a federal facility in a room with no windows. You describe every procedure you can remember, dates, wound types, patient descriptions, names when you knew them. You draw diagrams of the basement space. You reconstruct the supply chain for the anesthesia cart, where it came from, who delivered it, what the delivery schedule was. You describe Daria's role in detail. You describe the man who first approached you at the coffee shop, whose name you never knew and whose face you can draw from memory with enough accuracy that the sketch artist produces a recognizable composite on the 3rd attempt. The federal marshal who supervises the debrief doesn't thank you, doesn't acknowledge when something is useful, just asks the next question.
You start to understand that the information you're providing has been largely confirmed from other sources. You are not giving them new intelligence. You are filling in the last 3% of a picture they already have. You are sentenced 11 months after your arrest, 9 years, as agreed. Federal Correctional Facility. You will be eligible for parole review after serving 63 months. On the day of sentencing, the prosecutor reads a summary of your cases into the record. 31 documented procedures over 11 months, 14 patients who recovered fully, 9 who recovered with complications, 4 who required subsequent hospital treatment for infections or improper closures, 1 fatality, attributed not to malpractice but to the severity of the initial injury, and 3 patients who cannot be located and whose outcomes remain unknown. The judge looks at you for a long time before she speaks. She says the case represents one of the more genuinely complicated situations she has encountered in 22 years on the bench. A person with real ability, operating entirely within any legitimate framework, producing outcomes that ranged from life-saving to harmful, motivated by a mixture of financial desperation and what appears to be genuine clinical compulsion. She says she doesn't know what to do with that. Then she reads the sentence anyway. You are processed at the federal facility on a Thursday. They take your clothes, your watch, your wedding ring that you still wore even though you were divorced for 2 years. They give you a number. They take your photograph. They assign you a bunk in a cell block housing 340 inmates. You lie on the bunk that first night and you run procedures in your head. Old habit. The ceiling is the same off-white as the operating room. Level 8. What remains? You serve 4 years and 8 months before parole. The medical board permanently revokes your ability to sit the licensing exam. Permanently. Not suspended, revoked. The specific language of the ruling states that nature and duration of unlicensed practice constitutes a fundamental breach of patient safety standards that cannot be remediated through examination or supervised practice. You are not a doctor. You will never be a doctor. That is the permanent condition of the rest of your life. You get a job doing medical coding for an insurance company. Remote work. You sit at a desk in a small apartment and you translate physician notes into 5-digit alphanumeric codes that determine what insurance companies will and won't pay for. ICD-10, open wound of abdomen without complication, initial encounter. You know exactly what that looks like. You've closed 20 of them. The work pays $47,000 a year. It's the most legitimate money you have ever earned. You think about the 31 patients sometimes, not constantly, the way you think about anything that was once the center of your life and then wasn't. The man with the tension pneumothorax, the woman whose chest tube you placed in 4 minutes, the teenager whose radius you set imperfectly and who will feel it in cold weather for the rest of his life, the man who died on the table on a Tuesday while you applied pressure and watched the numbers fall. You don't know what happened to most of them. That's the part that doesn't resolve. The outcomes exist somewhere, you just don't have access to them anymore. What you know now, 4 years and 8 months later, is that the first decision was never really a single decision. It was a direction. The coffee shop, the envelope, the supply kit, the retainer, the basement. Each one felt like a choice. None of them were. They were all the same decision made once at the beginning, playing out across 11 months with the specific inevitability of a system that had already calculated every step before you sat down across from a man who knew your student loan balance and your address and exactly how desperate you were. You were not recruited because you were a criminal. You were recruited because you were competent and desperate and alone. Those 3 things together are more valuable to certain organizations than any criminal credential. You are not the first. You will not be the last. In a hospital in the same city, a 3rd-year medical resident is 3 weeks from her final licensing exam. She has $67,000 in student loans. Her program director placed her on academic probation last month after a procedural error during a laparoscopic cholecystectomy, the kind of error that happens to residents, the kind that gets documented and follows you, the kind that makes licensing boards pause. She is studying in the break room at 2 in the morning when her phone lights up with a message from a number she doesn't recognize. The message contains 3 things: her loan balance, her home address, a number with 5 figures. She stares at the screen for a long time. She is competent. She is desperate. She is alone. She hasn't answered yet. She will. This story is entirely fictional. However, unlicensed medical practice is extensively documented in criminological and public health research. If you thought this story would end differently, tell me in the comments. Subscribe for more.